I've been researching the audit procedures of Fort Knox. I found so many problems and anomalies and misconduct. But the thing is, I can't prove that the gold is not there.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, March 22nd at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, March 22nd, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Once again, if you are new to this channel or you have not already done so, please do subscribe. Click on the bell to be notified on new updates and give us a thumbs up. If you like what we do, we really do appreciate your support. Our guest today, first-time guest, is Jan Nieuwenhuijs, a precious metals analyst with Voima Gold. In particular, Jan is well known for his articles regarding the Chinese gold market, central banks' gold policies, and the international monetary system. And we are delighted to have him here today as our guest. Good day, Jan, and welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Great. We're glad you could make it. You're a very special guy. A lot of people follow your work, and we're delighted to have you. Jan, given this is the first time we've had you on our show, can you share with us a little about your background and what got you started researching into the gold market under the pen name which you might want to share with us?
Yeah. So my my first research was published under the name Koos Jansen. My first career actually was in the movie industry, in the sound industry. I was a sound engineer for movies. And after the financial crisis in 2008, which became reality in the Netherlands as well, because the movie industry collapsed in 2009, I became interested in economics. And I think it was in 2011 or something, I started reading books. I started to go on Twitter, and I felt comfortable using a different name. So I felt more free to speak out or whatever. This was a totally different time for me. I was, working in the sound industry or movie industry. So I just, had some fun on Twitter using the name Koos Jansen. But then my hobby developed, and in 2013 I did this discovery about the Chinese gold market, about the Shanghai Gold Exchange and stuff. So I started a blog, and because I already had some followers on Twitter with this Koos Jansen name, it was for me a logical step to create a blog with the same name, Koos Jansen. And then in 2014, I got a job offered, and I stayed with the name Koos Jansen. And only now, because I switched companies, I changed my name into my real name, Jan Nieuwenhuijs. So that's the background of Koos Jansen.
Okay, yeah, I was one of those guys that were following you from back then, so it's a real treat to get to speak to you. And I do remember you wrote pretty extensively about the Chinese gold market, including how much gold reserves China has, despite the skepticism of the official number that they put out. Your opinion, Jan, what's the latest estimate regarding the gold reserves of China? Are their gold purchases still increasing?
Well, according to some dynamics in the world, which probably we're going to talk about later, now the price is going up. They're decreasing their purchases in China, so it's not zero at the moment, but it's very sensitive to prices. So people in the East are very sensitive and price conscious when it comes to gold. But we have to make a distinction between non-monetary gold and official gold, monetary gold. So I think you asked how much the reserves were in China. So their official number is 2,000 tons at the moment, which is owned by the People's Bank of China. I did some research on this in 2015, and I really got close to some insiders, and I also got some numbers together and made an analysis that the People's Bank of China at that time in 2015 already had 4,000 tons. Now this is speculation because it's not official, but I still believe they have 4,000 tons or more. the People's Bank of China. But the population, of course, we could still see all the import numbers and the mining and things like that. So it was kind of easy to calculate how much the private hoards are in China. And I believe that they have by now about 20,000 tons in private ownership in China. So I also want to do some more research on that, because I like to know where that gold exactly is, how much is in like retail hands and how much is in very wealthy people or institutional hands. But for sure now it's non-monetary gold.
So the difference between non-monetary gold and monetary gold would be, if you could help us out with that.
Monetary gold is gold owned by a monetary authority. So a central bank, for example. So if the People's Bank of China, they buy gold through commercial banks, Chinese commercial banks, as a proxy, because if the People's Bank of China calls some billion bank in London, then it's kind of obvious, to give away their secrets. So they use, for example, ICBC. ICBC does the dealings in London. And the moment ICBC buys the gold for the People's Bank of China, they can, and it hands it over in ownership to the People's Bank of China. The People's Bank of China can monetize it. And once it's monetized, which is to say it's owned by a monetary authority, you can ship it around the world without it have to being reported in customs data. So that's a difference. And furthermore, it's just, for example, monetary gold really makes a distinction between what is owned by the government and what is owned by the citizens.
Okay, so I guess it gets a little bit harder to trace or track then.
It's impossible in customs data. It's impossible to track monetary gold. That is not required to be declared in customs data.
Yeah. Okay. In your opinion, what could be the possible reason or reasons why China is reporting a lower gold reserve than what they actually have?
Oh, this is partly because gold is a very political metal. So if you have geopolitical relationships across the world, and it has to do with the dollar and all sorts of stuff, they are really, really careful about these things. But the primary reason is if they would show how much they're buying, that would cause the gold price to go up significantly. So by underreporting their official gold reserves, it doesn't put a lot of focus on gold as the new big thing. And they have been able to buy gold at lower prices since, let's say, 2009. So, if they keep underreporting it, they're just continuously buying at cheaper prices instead of, if they would have said in 2015 they had 4,000 tons, the gold price would have been a lot higher, and they couldn't have accumulated on the dips as they do, as they have done probably in the last couple of years.
Okay, so China's been buying the dips, huh? It's advice we all
That's
got
what
to
they
take.
do. That's what they do. Yeah. There are a lot of charts and evidence for that they buy the dips. Yeah.
Okay. China has also been the factory of the West for several decades now. First, they had low-tech goods, and then they gradually moved up to high-tech goods, and quality has gotten better through the years. And in the process, they've lifted millions out of poverty from their population. Would you agree that China is using the dollar standard to its advantage, but at the same time, it's buying gold hand over fist to prepare for a future possibly where gold might have a major role or even a monetary role?
Your first question is about how they lifted so much people out of poverty, right? Yeah. I think that's just because they liberated their economy and moved from communism to sort of a quasi-communism or a socialist capitalism, however you want to call it. They have a name for it, but I forgot it. That is what lifted. Capitalism is very strong, so that lifted a lot of people out of poverty. There was not a dollar standard, in my opinion. It was just, they have a lot of dollar reserves in their international reserves, but that doesn't really have to do anything with the domestic economy. Although, of course, when you export a lot of goods, that tends to appreciate your currency, and they countered that by lowering the price of the renminbi, which made them accumulate a lot of dollars in their foreign exchange reserves. So that was the first part of your question. Now, the second part, I think they saw very early, maybe even they started liberalizing the gold market in the 1980s, actually, and it was very slowly, but then officially in 2002 when the Shanghai Gold Exchange was opened, and it really kicked off in 2010 and 2013. It exploded, and they also promoted the citizens to buy gold, and I think they do that because they see that gold preserves its purchasing power, and it protects the people from financial shocks and inflation and things like that. So on one hand, they're growing the economy by printing money, credit, all sorts of stimulus, etc. And at the same time, they're promoting their citizens to buy gold, so that if the renminbi collapses in value, you get inflation or whatever, the citizens still are insured, have an insurance on their savings, so they're protected.
Okay. So those are perhaps some of the plans why China seems to hoard a lot of gold. Are there any other reasons why you think China may be hoarding so much gold?
Well, I think they know that at one point the international monetary system will change. It has been based on, centered around the US dollar since also before 1944 when Bretton Woods was discussed. Before the Second World War, United States dollar was also the world reserve currency. But obviously, after the Second World War, the US dollar was the world reserve currency, but that cannot go on forever. All things come to an end, and especially because the United States central bank is also trapped. They have too much debt. They need some way to get out, and they will use inflation as well. And also other reasons are that the United States is using the dollar as a weapon, with sanctions and things like that. So, and also, like China and also other countries have a lot of foreign exchange reserves in dollars, but that makes you very sensitive to their monetary policy. So a lot of countries, even Europe, wants to move away from the dollar, and there's a strong incentive. We see the dollar rising now in strength. That's because there's anxiety in the markets, and the dollar still functions as a safe haven, just like gold. But eventually, the era of the dollar will end, and the Chinese know that, so they're preparing for that with buying gold.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. Jan, you also wrote in a recent article titled "The West-East Ebb and the Flood of Gold" about a pattern seen throughout decades regarding how physical gold moves between East and West, and it's pretty interesting. For our viewers who may not be familiar with this pattern, can you explain what was observed from this pattern and why it's important?
Yeah, so this pattern I called the West-East Ebb and Flood of Gold. First, to understand this pattern, we need to know the true essence of gold supply and demand dynamics. So with soft commodities, you have annual output production. For example, corn, you have so many corn production which comes out of the ground every year, and then you have demand. And of course, the friction between these two sets the price. Now with gold, it's completely different because there is so much gold above ground mined throughout history that the amount of gold mined every year only adds about 1.5% to the total above ground stock of gold. So for gold, it's less mine supply is not that relevant in the short term. What is more important for gold when it comes to how the price is set is how all this above ground metal is traded and how it moves. And there's currently 190,000 tons of gold above ground. And a lot of this gold moves across the globe back and forth in sync with the price. Now, why does that happen? Let's go back in time. Let's start at the beginning of the 20th century. In the West was already pretty advanced, right? The West, industrialized nations. And the East was, of course, a bit behind. And the difference is that in the East, people had no bank accounts or whatever, and they had gold as their bank. That was their way of saving. And in the West, gold coins, for example, were not really used anymore as a medium of exchange. So it vanished from their day-to-day lives. Now, what happened is that in the East, they kept on holding onto gold as they had more affinity with gold. Gold was still used and still is when somebody is a new child is born, when somebody gets married, for things like that. It's really deeply embedded in the culture of the East. So they, because of the difference I just shortly explained, in the East they have very much a long-term view on gold. I mean, this has been their savings for thousands of years, and they still have this affinity with it. As in the West, you know, what I just described as early as in the early 20th century, they were already financializing and looking at other investments and savings instruments. So what happened when the first observation I made with the West-East ebb and flood pattern was in the 1930s, when the dollar, when a lot of currencies around the world, a lot of countries devalued against gold. So what happened was that the price of gold, the purchasing power of gold, went up. So at that time in the East, they thought, well, we have a lot of these savings in gold, but it's very expensive now. So if we can sell a little bit to the West, to make a profit. So that was the first time I could see, I have data from, that there were significant flows coming out of India and China that were moving to the West when the price was going up. Now, then the second, actually 30%, it's maybe nice to know, to mention, is that 30% of all above ground gold was owned by the US Treasury at the end of that cycle in 1950. So the US Treasury was holding about 22,000 tons, and above ground gold was about 60 or 70,000 tons. Because not only China and India, but a lot of people sold gold to the United States Treasury because they devalued against gold and they bought it up from all over the world. Then, of course, we had Bretton Woods. The price was fixed at $35, and the dollar was as good as gold. But the US started to print a lot more dollars than they had gold in backing those dollars. So in the 60s, gold became very much undervalued in the minds of, for example, China. So what you saw is that when gold was very cheap back then, it was $35, it was pegged, that in 1965 China thought, and it was the central bank of China, by the way, because there were communists at the time and the people were not allowed to own gold, is that the People's Bank of China started to buy gold in London because they thought it was very cheap. So now you see a lot of above ground metal moving to the East when the price is low. And to make a long story a bit shorter, every time the price goes up, you see some metal going from the East to the West, and when the price goes down, you see metal going from the West to the East. So you could say that in the East, the people, and the pattern is still clear and there. So in the East, people buy low and sell high. That's one side of the story. Of course, the other side of the story is that people in the West, when they sell gold, maybe they made a loss on that gold, but they, when they feel confident, they like to invest in higher yielding assets. So, I haven't made the sum of who gained the most of it, but this is the pattern that has existed now for at least 80 years, and which is very important to understand also, because the pattern holds that the West is setting the price and the East is just, they're willing to play this game. They just buy more when the West is dumping gold, and whenever the West has a panic and they increase the price of gold, then the East thinks, well, now the price is so high, we can sell a little bit of our savings and make a huge profit on it. So I hope that's clear a little bit about this pattern.
No, very clear. Appreciate it. So right now, currently, do you think let's say the East is starting to shift back to the West, or do you think they're waiting again for maybe those all-time highs to come back into play, or are they in maybe a bit of a holding pattern, or still continuing to buy?
What you see now in India and China is that whenever the price is rising, like what happened in January and also in the last couple of months of 2019, like in May, June, July, August, then you really see that demand in the East, in like India and China, really decreases, really collapses. And so it doesn't grind to a halt. It's not zero. It can happen. For example, what happened in the past is that when prices are really high, that India, for example, or Dubai becomes a net exporter. That hasn't happened yet. Although I'm not sure about Dubai, that might have happened already. But so at this point, the price is rising. We're in a bull market. Demand in the East is slowing down. The price is still set in the West by London and New York, and maybe, but we'll see that if prices go really, I expect the gold price to go much higher. We can see some dis-hoarding from the East.
Yeah, okay, that was my question as I'm thinking about what you're saying. So let's say when the gold moves from the West to the East and the East has the gold, why isn't the East able to then reset the price before it goes back to the West?
Because they don't want to. They're price conscious. If you go to the supermarket and you see, like for example, you see bottles of wine and they're very cheap, you like to buy those bottles. And when you have them, for consumption or whatever, you don't want the price to rise. You just like to buy more of it. Because the price is so cheap, and in the end they know it preserves their purchasing power, so they're just happy to buy it on low prices, and if it goes up, they buy less of it. They have no interest in aggressively moving the price up. I think it will go up anyway, or in the long term, gold does what it does. It will preserve your purchasing power, and so only when the West will drive it up again, they're like, hey, we're selling some. So this is their family wealth, and they have no doubts about it will go up someday. It will go up someday. It will rise with inflation and preserve its purchasing power. So they're just very price conscious, and they buy when it's the right opportunity. And what happens, of course, in China is that they have bought a lot of physical gold, but what also matters in terms of setting the price is how much volume you get on the exchanges. So the Shanghai Gold Exchange, of course, it's gaining some volumes there. So they can have a bigger influence in the future regarding the price of gold, and maybe they lose this mentality of long-term view, and so the dynamics of the pattern will change.
Yeah,
that is something I do not know. So like Turkey is also, coins were invented in Turkey, in Lydia, 600 years before Christ. Yeah. And so the Turkish people have a very strong affinity with gold. But if you see the trading volumes on the Borsa Istanbul, it's ridiculously low.
Yeah.
So, that's my observations. Of course, these things can change, so I don't know what will happen in the future. Of course, the East has been financializing as well. I mean, they have banks and derivatives and stocks and bonds and all that, but yeah.
Okay. All right, let's get back to the West. Have you researched into what could the real gold reserves be that the U.S. has today? Do they really have that 8,000 tons of gold?
Ooh, that's a sensitive question. I don't know. I don't
That's a
know.
good
Maybe
answer.
you, yeah. I don't know. The thing is that what bothers me, what worries me, is that I don't know if you read my research on Fort Knox, on the audits of Fort Knox. I've been researching the audit procedures of Fort Knox for a couple of years, and I think a month or two ago, I published a last piece on it, and I found so many problems and anomalies and misconduct that happened in these auditing procedures that, first of all, a lot of people didn't even know this gold was audited, so they're not really willing to flaunt with the audit results. Even the most hardcore gold analysts didn't even know the gold was audited. So that's strange. I mean, if you audit it as metal, why would you go out in the world and be proud of it? The second thing is that audits are meant to assure us that the gold is there. So if there's anything wrong with the audits, we can really that really makes me doubt about the credibility of the audits, and then I'm starting to worry if the gold is really there. But in my opinion, I have proven that the audits are not reliable, and it should be done again. And I've also talked to some professional auditors, and they have looked at my work, and they say the same. Yeah. They're actually making a documentary in the United States probably this year about this topic, and I will be speaking and working with this project also, because it's not a small thing. But the thing is, I can't prove that the gold is not there. So I'm worried about these audits and about fraud and things like that. But I can't prove the gold isn't there. I have looked at, if the United States would have sold some of the gold, it would have shown up somewhere in trade statistics. If they would have sold it in London, for example, then London or the UK should have had a very large trade deficit, so to say, in terms of gold, because the gold secretly came in and it was, openly exported. So, but I haven't been able to trace the gold somewhere on this planet. Now, they might have sold it to other central banks, covertly, I don't know. But at this point, I do not have any evidence the gold isn't there. I'm just worried about the audits and about the integrity of the whole auditing process. And I would like to see them doing the audits again. And I would also like to see all other central banks in the world doing independent audits. So there's more transparency in the gold business.
Okay. I guess the camps are either the U.S. has the gold or they don't have the gold, meaning they have less than what they say they have. What's the impact? Let's say they do this audit comes out and U.S. is shown to have 2,000 tons of gold. What does the rest of the world think or do?
Oh, there would be I don't have words for it. I mean, the whole, the world reserve currency now is the US dollar, and that is in part because they have so much gold not backing it at a fixed parity 1-to-1, but supporting, all the dollars and bonds abroad. This gold provides confidence about the US dollar, just like the euro is a world reserve currency, because the Europeans have so much official gold reserves to, provide a backstop when things go haywire. So if the news comes out that the U.S. only has 2,000 tons, then there would be China would be prepared. I can tell you that. Yeah, but no, that would be astonishing. I mean, world-shocking news, and yeah, I can't tell what would happen, but that would be big, very big.
Do you think gold will come back and have a role as being a monetary metal again?
Well, it is still a monetary metal. If you look at, you could make a case that we never left the gold standard. I mean, if you look, for example, at central banks, they all have gold in their vaults. You know, we never really abandoned it, or the monetary authorities. And it's still, last time I looked, it's about 20% of international reserves are still in gold, which is a lot. And then to think that like 50% of international reserves are dollars, which are also, supported by this gold. But what I think is, I don't see us going to a classic gold standard anytime soon, unless it really has to. They need to step in to calm down and reassure the markets. But what can happen, what I think will happen, is that we're moving towards a multi-reserve currency system, and gold will play a bigger role in that. So interest rates are very low, so it doesn't really make sense to own negative yielding bonds or very low yielding bonds that have a counterparty risk. So, I think the market share, so to say, in international reserves will grow in terms of gold.
I was searching the internet recently to find out how much silver there is above ground today, and I came across another article of yours where your estimate varies pretty significantly from the numbers that the Silver Institute puts out. Your opinion, or from your research, how much above ground silver is there really?
There are 1.7 million tons of silver above ground, and to make a distinction, 800,000 tons. Sorry, these are big numbers. 800,000 tons of that is in industrial products. So I wouldn't really count it as the above ground supply, but still 900,000 tons of it is in jewelry. It's in bullion form, in coins, in silverware, etc. And as we know from monetary metals, just like gold, that whenever the price rises, that metal can come into the market again. It actually will. If the price of gold or silver goes up, scrap supply increases. So I think this number of 900,000 tons of above ground silver is something to keep an eye on in terms of, you want to calculate the stock to flow ratio. Yeah. And for silver, I would say it's about 30.
Okay, and so being that silver is used so much in industrial use today, even medical use, is there a concern where, let's say, if silver price, if it should rise, that these end products, consumer products, would they start to be or get a bit more expensive?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, if your resources, commodities get more expensive, then the end products become more expensive as well. So maybe the demand for silver from the industry goes down. I don't know. I have to say I'm not much. I'm more of a gold expert than a silver expert. Silver is very difficult because it's like Jeffrey Christian said the other day. It's a schizophrenic metal, right? So it's used a lot for industrial applications, but it's also still a monetary metal. So it's a very tough analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess that's why schizophrenic people like me are attracted to that schizophrenic metal. But in view that silver was used more times as money than gold throughout history, what do you think the chances are that silver will have a monetary role again?
Yeah, I don't think it will. I see a lot of retail investors being focused on silver, buying coins, bullion, etc., for investment purposes. But if you look at the big money, let's say central banks, hedge funds, institutional money, they're mostly focused on gold, right? So the central banks all have gold in their vaults, not silver. So I think they're also, I wrote an article about this as well. I think a lot of national European central banks are also preparing for a significant shift in the international monetary system, for which they buy gold or repatriate gold, and they're starting to talk differently about gold. So all these, the big players are more into gold. And me personally, I'm more interested in gold than in silver. That is not to say that silver has shown in the past that it can go up faster than gold. But I don't really know. But your question was, will it be implemented in a new monetary fashion, right?
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening. Also because, even paper money, we use less now as a medium of exchange in day-to-day purchases.
Yeah.
And like you said, in history, silver was used for as a medium of exchange, and gold was more used as a store of value.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we don't use anything for day-to-day for groceries or anything, when it's all done digitally, I don't see any role for silver there, unless of course you get a coronavirus or some other disaster in which you get, I don't know, power outs or these let's call them Armageddon events. Then silver can be very. I own silver coins as well, because you could still, make small payments with silver coins.
Okay. See that, guys? Jan does own silver coins. So as you guys were starting to frown, you can smile again.
Yeah, of course. It's very sensible.
Okay. That's a good answer. Fair answer. Great answer. Jan, can you let our listeners know more about your work and where you're at now and what you're currently doing?
Well, I work at Voima Gold at the moment, which is a Finnish startup. It's a gold dealer. Interesting thing about Voima Gold is that it has its own chain of integrity. So we source our own gold and cast our own bars. We have our own vaults, just to minimize the counterparty risk. If you with some other dealers, you might store your gold. You buy it with one party, it's stored at another company in a vault, and you have more counterparty risks involved. So we try to minimize all that. We spend a lot of money in research and development. So there are a lot of interesting things coming out, probably this year or next year. And I'm doing research for them. So I write about. I'm doing a sort of a series now. At my previous company, I wrote a lot about the Chinese gold market and did a whole thing about explaining every single piece of it. And now I'm doing a whole series about the global gold market, and I'm writing about, for example, the essence, like I just described, the essence of gold supply and demand, the west-east ebb and flood of gold. Now I'm going to talk about the futures market, the London gold market. I'm also going to talk about the SDR. And so I want to cover all these bits of the gold market for people that are interested, so they can understand the entire, apparatus.
And you're on Twitter as well, right?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as well, very active. So people can follow me. My handle is @jangold_.
Okay, great. One last question though. When you hear people say gold back won or China will have the next reserve currency, what are your thoughts?
Well, they are a long way from having being the next world reserve currency. They want to internationalize the renminbi, but to be a world reserve currency, you need a couple of things. One, you need a good law system. So, if foreigners own your bonds, for example, they need to be pretty sure that in case of whatever, you have a good judicial system, which China doesn't have, of course. You need an open capital account, which is still closed in China, or just very little opened. And you need a floating exchange rate. And the renminbi is, of course, still a little bit managed by the PBOC. These are a few things, and also you need a current account deficit. Now, you don't really need all of this, but when you look at China, they're pretty far from being able to have a world reserve currency. But we'll see. That's not going to happen in the near future. What was your other question? Gold-backed
reserve currency. Oh, you answered that part. Yeah, gold-backed one. Yeah, renminbi.
Gold-backed. Yeah. Well, if you look at the Chinese Communist Party, I mean, they are really control freaks, right? So they really like to just like in the West, like to print money and control the economy and whatnot. And I don't think they have a gold-backed yuan in the cards on the board in the near future. No, they might, of course, when there's a crisis, have to peg the current their currency to gold. But this is not something they desire in the near future.
Okay, Jan, we thank you for your time, and we hope we can do this again soon, and we wish you all the best.
Yeah, I hope as well. Thank you for interviewing me.
That was Jan Nieuwenhuijs, precious metals analyst with Voima Gold. For more of his insights on the global economy, please visit voimagold.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content. And do also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.